The
Sorry.
second being, oh, no worries, a history of affordable housing in Norwalk. That's followed by a summary of the housing needs assessment. There is the full version of the housing needs assessment in the appendices. Then there's the land use and zoning analysis, and lastly, the vision, goals, and actions. So the introduction and executive summary, it provides an overview of compliance with the 830J requirements. That is the state law that established the need for an affordable housing plan. It defines affordable housing in terms of the HUD guidelines. It identifies the key vision and guiding principles for the plan, and those are statements that came out or developed through the public outreach component of the project. It provides a state and local context in terms of what the state is doing to advance affordable housing, as well as WestCog and what's going on in the surrounding communities. It also identifies the key stakeholders and agencies that are involved in affordable housing, and it summarizes the key steps for developing the plan and the overarching conclusions of the plan. So the vision statement that emerged through this process, and this is a long-term goal statement, is that Norwalk strives to be a city with housing accessible to all, a place where residents can live and work because of the affordable, diverse housing stock that accommodates the diversity of its population. So the entire document is geared towards achieving that goal. So next are the guiding principles. These are the 4 main principles, and all of the vision, goals, and action items at the end of the plan are tied to each one of these guiding principles. So the first being Norwalk is a diverse and inclusive city that strives to provide a diversity of housing types to meet the needs of all residents, as well as those who are employed in Norwalk and desire to live within the city. So one thing we heard through the process is that there are a number of people who are employed within Norwalk. They work in the hospitals, they work in retail, they work in the municipal government, and they are unable to find affordable places to live. So this is a need. Norwalk has a critical need to provide more affordable housing, social services, and economic pathways for its very low-income households. The market alone will not address this gap, and public investment is required. So this is not just the affordable housing component, but also the supplemental services requirement to help people achieve housing and economic security. Norwalk recognizes that the financial incentives such as tax abatements and grants are needed to bridge the market gap and facilitate the preservation and construction of quality, affordable, and workforce housing. So there is a gap in the market and the ability to provide affordable housing, and there are programs needed at the state and federal level, and there's also the possibility of some local level programs that could help bridge that gap and make some of these projects financially feasible to achieve the goal of more affordable housing. And lastly, Norwalk recognizes that the housing crisis is a complex regional problem that requires partnerships with the state and federal agencies to address its many fronts. Norwalk is committed to advancing equity in housing and to address the enduring racial disparities in income levels and housing access. So Norwalk is not on an island. We are in a region that is all suffering from this housing crisis. And Norwalk is certainly doing its part in really striving towards meeting the needs of its residents, but we also need to look at this as a regional problem and work with our state agencies, our federal agencies, and our neighbors to address this as well. So the second chapter of the document is the history of affordable housing in Norwalk. And this just provides an overview of the key historic federal and state policies affecting housing, as well as some of the key milestones in Norwalk's land use and housing history. So Norwalk actually has a really rich history of trying to provide affordable housing for its residents. Its housing authority goes all the way back to 1939. The Fair Housing Act, which is a federal act in 1968. Following that, Norwalk did advance some affordable housing programs. The largest one was then in 1987 with the Norwalk establishing the Fair Housing Advisory Commission and Fair Housing Officer. In 1989, that is when 830G was established by the state. And then obviously we had the Great Recession, which affected affordability across the region. And the requirement for the preparation of affordable action plan came in 2021, and now here we are in 2023, sorry, well, 2024, but you started developing this in 2023. So the housing needs assessment summary goes through the entire process. It focuses on the robust and engaging community outreach that was conducted. So there were a number of pop-up events, stakeholder interviews. We did do quite a bit of analysis of the demographic and housing situation, looking at market data to identify trends and major shifts. We identified disparities and the unique needs of certain subpopulations within the city. And it served as a tool for identifying potential policy items as well as program designs, which was the next phase in the development of the plan. So some of these statistics we've gone over in the past, so I'll just go through them pretty quickly. The first being that Norwalk has a critical need to provide more affordable housing, social services, and economic pathways for its very low-income households. So even though there's a relatively high median income of $98,000 a year, a quarter of the population earns less than $50,000 a year. And that burden is more among the renters than the owners, but there's definitely a number of both renters and homeowners that are financially burdened, and that shows up in the next slide. There are some renters and homeowners at all income levels that are financially burdened by the high cost of housing in Norwalk. Almost 40% of all of Norwalk's households pay more than 30% of their income towards housing costs. And 30% is the guideline set by HUD for what is considered affordable for that person's income level. So the city needs to expand its supply of rental housing that are affordable to households earning less than $75,000 a year, or 83% of Connecticut's median income of $92,000 a year. So that's almost half of Norwalk's renters that pay more than 30% of their household income towards housing costs. So it's about almost 8,000 households. And these cost burden rates are especially high for households earning less than $75,000 a year. The city needs wider and more affordable options for home ownership. This is something we heard quite a bit in our public outreach component, was that there just weren't a lot of options for starter homes and entry-level home ownership opportunities. Between 2012 and 2022, the home ownership rate fell from 65% of households to 55% of households, and the median sales price for a home in Norwalk rose from about $413,000 in 2015 to about $700,000 in 2023. Norwalk needs more housing to accommodate its workers, including retail workers, public safety personnel, teachers, and hospital workers. Approximately 75% of workers employed within Norwalk do not live within the city. And some of this is by choice, but there are a number of workers who would choose to live here if there were opportunities for them to live here. The lack of affordable housing can make it harder for Norwalk's employers to secure labor and to grow their businesses. The city does have a growing supply of new rental housing that serves the regional and housing market and fulfills local housing quality of life and economic development needs. And a sizable segment of Norwalk's population is able to afford these higher priced apartments. And also these apartments have been key to revitalizing parts of the city, like South Norwalk and the Route 7 corridor. And they've also resulted in the production of at least some affordable housing units. All kinds of rental housing are needed, but there is an especially acute need for affordable 2-bedroom rental and family-size units. So affordable 2-bedroom apartments are in especially high demand for young couples, starter families, and seniors, who now represent about 1/5 of the city's population. And that's something we heard over and over again in the outreach component. The city needs to continue advancing housing linked to transit, walkable neighborhoods, and economic development strategies. The utilization for trips to work within Norwalk was under 2%. And we did hear broadly through our community outreach that there was a concern about worsening traffic conditions. So having more housing by transit is something that can help offset that. So the next section of the document was the land use and zoning analysis. This is where we took a look at the current land use trends over time, the current zoning, and obviously the city just went through a pretty big update of the zoning code. So we've identified a few items there for further consideration. But just to start, within the city, a large portion of the land is zoned for single-family development. It's about 65% of the total land area. And that's everything shown in this light yellow color. Of the land for residential use, 77% is dedicated to single-family development. I'm sorry, let me clarify. Residential is these shades, sort of the shades of yellow. Single-family is just the light yellow. This means that there's limited opportunities to add additional housing stock of, of higher density. So some of the areas where there could be potentials generally along the Route 7 corridor and the Route 1 corridor, and then in some of the more like South Norwalk and downtown areas. We also took a look at underutilized land. This we defined just for the analysis purposes as vacant land, surface parking lots, low-rise buildings where the zoning allows for a substantially taller structure. So this was primarily parcels that were zoned CD3C or CD4. Underutilized municipal property, but not parkland, and vacant buildings. So that could be office parks or retail. We also wanted to make sure that we're putting this in the context of historic districts within the city. So these areas here are the historic districts. So again, the areas where there was potential was primarily along the Route 7 corridor and the Route 1 corridor. We took a more detailed look at the government-owned land within this. So within the document, there's a map and a table that has each of the properties listed, and identifies the address, the current use, the owner, the acreage, the current zoning district, and the considerations and challenges. So for example, map point 1 right here, this is a small parking area that's used for overflow for the Stepping Stones and Lockwood Mathers Museum, and it also provides some parking for the Norwalk River Valley Trail. There has been quite a bit of development in this corridor in recent years, so there is potential for this to be used, but any potential reuse of this site would need to consider the current civic use of parking for these important facilities. And that is something that we saw, throughout looking at these properties, is that a lot of them they do have a current parking use for the most part, and that parking use would likely need to be accommodated in any future redevelopment. Another one that we took a look at, number 2, for example, is the courthouse. This is a situation where the city does not have control over that property. That property is owned by the state of Connecticut. And at this point, there's no clear plan from the state on what they would like to do with it in the long term. It hasn't been open since COVID. So I'm going to just flip through these slides, but if we want to come back to any of these particular properties later, we can during the Q&A if there's any questions about them. So the last section is the visions, principles, goals, and actions. And this is where we've identified 4 major themes: zoning and land use, public-private partnerships, taxing and financing innovations, and federal and state advocacy. And within those themes, we have the principle, the goal, the action, a time frame, the responsible party, and the challenges. So I'm going to go through just a high level of this document. What we can do at the end in the Q&A portion is I can pull up the actual document if there's any specific questions on any of the action items as people were reviewing the draft plan, we can pull those up and go through them. But just a high level, so zoning and land use goals. So update the City of Norwalk zoning regulations to further expand affordable and workforce housing opportunities. The main strategies and within this category were we reviewed the inclusionary zoning requirements, and I'll speak to that a little bit more on the next slide. identified opportunities for density bonus and tax incentives. So as part of this process, we did speak with a number of not-for-profit as well as for-profit developers. And one of the things we heard is that the tax incentive component of this, or tax abatement, is key to bridging that affordability gap for the creation of more affordable housing. Expansion of certain zoning districts, the further relaxation of minimum parking requirements, the further relaxation of ADU regulations, and opportunities for streamlining the development review process. So, one of the things we heard is, could the inclusionary zoning be increased? So the current it's 10%. Could it be up to 15 or 20%? One of the things we wanted to make sure is that if we did increase that, would that inadvertently stall development by making a development not financially feasible? So what we found in doing this analysis, and it was based on a number of assumptions that we vetted with several not-for-profit developers, private developers, and some city staff. We found that the current set aside of 10% is appropriate for the current economic climate of higher interest rates and higher construction costs. However, we do think that this is something that should be reviewed periodically. Like I said earlier, adding incentives like density bonuses and tax abatements, and so the carrot instead of the stick, may facilitate the construction of workforce housing above the minimum requirement. And then future increases to the inclusionary zoning requirement should be rolled out over a minimum of 5 years to mitigate the effect on land values and the potential stalling of projects that are in the pre-development phases. So what we heard is that when you add these inclusionary zoning requirements, it affects the land value of the property. So if there's a project that was already in pre-development, so the land value is already set, by changing that requirement now, you could affect the pro forma and could unintentionally stall that project or make that project not financially feasible. But by rolling it out over a longer period of time, like 5 years, that would allow potential developers to factor in that additional cost into their purchase price for the property. The next major category was public-private partnerships and goals. So this was facilitating the construction of new affordable housing units through the use of underutilized city-owned land. So that ties back to that map and the analysis I spoke to earlier. And for any of these properties that have potential, it could be a competitive developer RFP process to solicit proposals for the construction of new affordable units. There's also opportunities to work with community partners to facilitate the development and preservation of affordable and workforce housing. This could be through things like microgrant programs to fund capital improvements in exchange for deed-restricted affordable units on existing properties, for example. And to expand both housing and economic development opportunities for low-income residents. So an example here is to support local not-for-profit workforce development programs through things like Community Development Block Grant funding and the Neighborhood Assistance Act tax credit program. There's some overlap between the last section and the tax and financing innovation goals. Some of the options here are to support the development of affordable homeownership unit pathways. And this could be things like the Connecticut Department of Housing Land Bank and Land Trust program, and providing local tax incentives. So this could be through the Brownfield program, for example. There also could be establishing an affordable housing property tax incentive policy for qualified affordable units to incentivize deed-restricted affordable units. And lastly, the federal and state advocacy goals. So as I mentioned earlier, this is a regional, if not a national issue. So expanding housing opportunities by lobbying Norwalk state and federal delegations to address tax and financing policies that act as a barrier to certain types of units, such as multifamily ownership buildings, and to expand existing affordable housing programs. So we identified a number of programs that are in existence today and some legislation that is pending or recently passed. And so we've identified these as things to push for the expansion of, and to make sure that some of these programs, especially programs at the federal level, are sized appropriately and geared towards cities. So sometimes these programs don't, they may not recognize the high cost of housing in some of these more urban areas on the East Coast, for example. And we need to make sure that the thresholds are appropriate for this part of the country and the types of housing that are available in this part of the country. So not just single family homes. And lastly, working with Westcog, for example, to further the fair housing goals and the creation of affordable housing in adjacent municipalities. So they had a number of action items in their recent affordable housing finance study, and supporting them in their efforts. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions. I'll stop sharing and then I can pull it back up if there's any specific slides you want me to go back to.
I have many.
Okay.
I put some of them in writing, and I don't necessarily expect you to have answers today. It's just questions that came to mind looking at this. I love this. It's so informative, and so many great ideas. I focus on the things just that I sort of bumped against or had questions about, but that doesn't mean that like 95% of this isn't super lovely. One question I had is that you reviewed existing policy documents, and you said there was a South Norwalk Station area study 2020 to 2022 that recommended that the city look at limited equity housing co-ops and a community land trust. And that came up again in these recommendations. And I guess I'm just wondering what was done in response to that recommendation, if it was recommended just a couple of years ago, and wanting to make sure that the recommendations that come out of this, move forward and don't just stay in the plan. I don't know if anybody knows. I just wondered about that. Another one was with the AKRF traffic, the AKRF study, wanting to know what the feasibility number, the distance to hurdle, whatever that number was, what is it for our current rates of 10% set aside at 80% AMI? Like, what are we starting from? I understand that negative is not good, but is it the case that we're currently at like 0 and, or are we at like a low -2, and we're like these changes would bring it to -3, that kind of thing. And then the bigger question is sort of wondering, what would the parameters need to be to meet our goals? So would the unit sizes need to be smaller? Would we need to build 20-story buildings? Like, not just is an incremental change to our affordable housing regulations feasible or not feasible, but what would need to happen exactly to make increased affordability feasible using these same sort of calculations. And that's all I'll throw out for right now. Nick's got his hand.
We can take those questions before we go to the next batch or respond to them. So, so first up, I'm not sure that anything happened with the community land trust recommendation in the prior plan. So just for the group, community land trust, what that does is it allows land to be purchased, put in this land bank, and for the bank would hold the land indefinitely, and basically a building that was constructed on that land could be a condo, and that would be a home ownership opportunity within the condo, but the underlying land would remain part of that land bank. And that way, if someone the individual units would also have deed restrictions that would restrict the potential resale value of that property. So it would build in, it could appreciate, but it wouldn't appreciate at market rate. So that those home ownership opportunities would stay affordable indefinitely. So that is something that if the city was interested, one of those it could be an option for one of those government-owned properties, or it could be an option for a partnership with a faith-based institution that has excess land. And then Gareth and John are on. I think I'd like to punt the other question to you.
Yeah, hi, this is John Neal. There were a couple of questions there, but try to get at them. So one related to findings with respect to the existing 10% affordability levels. The focus of our analysis was not on that kind of existing. We were looking more at those deeper levels of affordability and higher percentage rates. And I can say that if you work it backwards, so to speak, based on the assumptions that we used for those higher levels and deeper levels of affordability, you would find that project development would be challenged. And what does that suggest? It suggests that already these affordable housing projects are finding some collection or some combination of either tax incentives that we have not accounted for, lower land value than the assumptions that we're using, which reflect really the current percentages, or other factors that are making those projects work. And that to your other question about what exactly would kind of fill that gap, I think it is a combination, again, of further tax abatements or incentives. When you get towards 20%, you also have available to you things like LIHTC at the federal level. If it's government-owned lands or properties, you can obviously leverage that to facilitate higher and deeper levels of affordability. So those are the kind of things that would kind of fill those financing pro forma type gaps that we're recognizing with these higher and deeper levels of affordability.
Thank you so much.
Nick.
I had 3 questions. Do you want me to go one by one, or do you want me to just give them all out there and we can go from there? What do you prefer, Ashley?
I think one by one, actually.
Okay. The first one was obviously at the end, the things to go after. I forget what we're calling that. The action plan is quite exhaustive.
Yeah.
Probably like 80 some odd items on there. If you were to pick like the top 3 that would have the most meaningful impact over a reasonable amount of time, like what would you go after? You don't have to answer that now if you don't want to. I don't want to put you on the spot, but it's more of like I think people are going to get really overwhelmed by that.
Yeah, I
sort of
see
like-
that.
And
I
then
think taking a real hard, I think I will take that one.
okay.
Taking a really hard look at the underutilized land analysis and any of those city-owned properties, and reaching out to some of the faith-based institutions that have excess land. So seeing about trying to facilitate any public-private partnerships. In terms of the zoning, we identified a number of things, but obviously the city just went through a major overhaul. So I think those are really important. I would put those on medium term, but what I would advance more quickly is the tax abatement side of it. Is there some density bonuses or tax abatements that could be weaved in sooner rather than later to help bridge that gap? Because that was the big piece we heard when we were doing the pro forma from the development community to help bridge that gap to get those extra units. And then as part of that, trying to target that 80 to 85% mark, because that's something that might be more easy for some of these developers to finance. So taking a look at that component.
On the tax abatement piece, if you have any sort of guidance or examples, because when you say that around Norwalk, for rightly or wrongly, people freak out. And it's like, oh my God, it's this gift to developers, et cetera, et cetera. More of like how to paint that in the picture of, well, the economics of this is not as clear and it actually gives back to the community in different ways. And, if you have anything around that, I think that would be helpful here, because when people, I think, hear tax abatement, they go straight to oh, this is a gift for developers to, build bigger buildings at a lower rate and then have a windfall on the other side of it. So if you have anything around that, I think that would be super helpful to just giving people an understanding around this, because the financing stuff's complicated, right? I don't think most people are not experts in commercial financing or residential financing. And it's a lot of people's professions. So I get the nuance of it, but I think that would be helpful. My second question is probably for John on the 10% on the affordable housing memo. I just want to make sure I'm stating it back to you. Like, I'm going to say it in layman's terms. Let me know if I'm saying this right to you. But basically, given the current zoning regs, to go higher affordability, so a higher, go to 15% or 20% workforce housing, does not pencil out with what it would cost to run these buildings over time. Thus, the developers would have a negative income, cash flow, or whatever fancy finance word we're going to put in there, such that they're not going to ever build anything. So it's basically a waste of time.
That's correct. In the absence of, again, tax incentives, some mechanisms that vary from the assumptions we're using with respect to land costs, revenues generated, and those types of things.
Awesome.
Yeah. And to your point on messaging, it's always very difficult because the property tax abatements feel very direct, and the quantification of the benefit associated with the provision of workforce housing is just a tougher thing to quantify, immediately against that. You can speak to the importance of workforce housing in terms of, keeping costs for businesses down and things of that nature. But, unfortunately, there's not that one-to-one relationship. It's always a challenge.
Totally. That makes a ton of sense. And my last question is, you mentioned about WestCog having a plan, and that's all well and good, but if you have any suggestions on holding WestCog accountable or anything there to make that happen, because unfortunately, I feel like it's something that they put out there, but there's no intent of actually following through on it because how difficult it is to build in our neighboring communities. And I don't know if there's anything there that can be done, but I just don't know what. I just don't have trust in that, to say, to just be blunt. And I don't think there is, honestly. So that's more of like probably an unfair
Show up
question
at their
to even
meetings.
ask. Yeah, that's what I figured. Okay, I appreciate that.
I will reiterate one of the three points that Ashley mentioned, just from my own experiences working with the city in New York City. They are looking at their own assets as a strategy to move forward with providing more and deeper levels of affordability because they have that opportunity. So, we are seeing as planners some requests to start to look at their portfolio and think about some public-private partnerships for those sites.
You're saying about other communities in Fairfield County?
No, this is going on in New York City, where there
New York
is
City.
kind of a revisit of their portfolio of assets.
Yeah, it sounds like what the whole motion of the city of yes and everything, and
Yeah.
all the parking.
There's also there was
through.
a city, it was a Darien that bought the Avalon, or Wilton, one of them
Buchanan
looking
did.
at buying those buildings that they already, or acquiring the buildings, and then they're owned by the government, and then they can use that to leverage for the affordability.
Exactly.
That's the kind of thing you're talking about.
Yeah, that's also an opportunity. Absolutely.
Those are my three. Thank you.
Thank you. Nicole.
Thank you. Thanks for the report. It was very informative. It's all laid out. Appreciate that. There's some things that I'm still struggling with, of course, with the 10%. With regards to what you guys just said about that, are you talking about things that are just luxury units that include so many amenities? I mean, are we talking about projects like that? Because I'm feeling like if you don't have so many amenities, maybe you can build something where the percentage can be more than 10%. Plus some other, there's a whole lot. There's more creative opportunities to create some affordable housing. But I don't understand when we say we can't. You said if it's in their plan, okay, that if they have a plan right now, I get that. But new people putting in new applications for developments, there's no way that we can increase that number moving forward. And maybe we don't need a pool, right? I mean, like,
And I don't want to suggest that there are not opportunities for 15%, 20% to be financially feasible under certain circumstances. I would say that generally it would require additional incentives or adjustments in the program that you're offering. And to your question, we looked not necessarily at just luxury units. We looked at kind of a reasonable cost associated with, non-luxury.
So Nicole, I think like this is like a cruxy issue here of like putting aside let's assuming all the assumptions are right here. Like the bonus here could be they can go 3 stories taller or 5 stories taller. I don't know what there's going to be a magic. There's a number for which they need the units, the regular units to rent at to offset with the with the workforce housing units. But if we don't want to go taller, we get stuck in this sort of space of how do you get the density that they need to make these financially viable. And I'm all for making them financially viable. It's just, I think those are the things in the study that that you can play with, right? Because it's really, John, right? It's really height and density
Square
of the
feet of the
We can
unit.
certainly look at some of those adjustments. To the question though on timing, the challenge with implementing immediately a requirement like that is, as Ashley mentioned, for those developers who have already purchased lands that are assuming that those lands can produce a certain amount of revenue. And that assumption was based on 90% market rate rather than it was 80% market rate. So those increased costs associated with the site to those developers who are already underway in the ground purchase the land could, result in some stalls if they're already kind of close to the margin on making that an affordable project. So that's why we would recommend more of kind of like a ramp up and, further obviously examination of these various opportunities on how best to facilitate, more and deeper levels of affordability, in a way that developers would find appealing.
thank you.
Michelle. Oh, sorry.
Somebody else wants to say something?
Go ahead, Michelle.
Just with the action steps, there seems to be a lot of like, consider this, and these are the, but maybe we don't have the staffing, like it almost feels like a real lack of commitment to any initiative. And I guess I'm just curious about that. And, I think they're, like if I thought about like community pushback, right? It's that there's a lot of great ideas in here, but not seeming to be a real commitment to follow through on any of those ideas. And I was just hoping you would kind of reflect on that a little bit.
So the challenges column does identify, I think that's the column you're speaking to. So it does outlay some of the challenges that we're hearing from staff when we are coming up with these ideas and limited resources that may be available. We can, I think if we took another look at the list and we outline the priority items, maybe we played with how it's laid out so we can put forward just to, and actually one of the comments that we got earlier via email was maybe organizing the table a little bit more clearly. So that's something we can definitely go back and do. I don't know if Steve, if you want to speak to the staffing resources.
Sorry, my mouse wasn't cooperating. Yeah, and that's something, we did talk to the administration about this a little bit. And it's when the first draft of the table was there, it had all these recommendations, but we had almost the opposite concern was we have all these things in there that we say we're going to do, and we may not be able to do them. So that's why there's qualifying language in there. Maybe something, maybe going back to Nick's question at the beginning, maybe we could also look at like maybe there's like a priority list of, low hanging fruit we can tackle right away, or things that we could hit that aren't resource heavy, those kind of things. Maybe that helps, but then, for sure we can look at the language and, we don't want to make it wishy-washy. I don't like to do that. I like to have stuff actionable for sure.
Yeah, we just hate for people to say like, wow, you did a really great job of assessing a problem and identified that we have a very serious problem, but you're not making a commitment on the back end to actually do anything about that problem. And so I think you're right. Sometimes it's like we want to give ourselves a little bit of space, but maybe on certain ones that feel like we really have to commit to this, we could kind of retract some of the challenge language or the using terms like consider, because I would just hate for people to respond to this in a way that's like, so it's a lot of talk, but no committed action.
Greg, I think you had your hand up next.
Yes, thank you. On that same thought, I guess my question is, once this plan is completed and submitted, what happens to the committee? So where's the accountability to continue the effort to drive affordable housing? Will that just rest within the department, or will an oversight committee be formed to ensure that each of these short-term, long-term activities are implemented and there's accountability? So what is the thinking behind, once the plan is submitted, how do we keep the momentum to ensure that these things get implemented and we begin to make an impact? So that's my first question. Comment as it relates to, and this is a minor comment, when we look at the history timeline, I think we should also include the Affordable Housing Trust Ordinance that we put together. That was a major piece of work that's not listed on the timeline in terms of, steps that we've made for affordable housing. And that was a recent piece of work that was done. So that should definitely be added to the history of affordable housing in Norwalk. And then thirdly, I know Councilmember Johan Lopez submitted several questions to you, Steve. He's on as a attendee. I don't know if we can add him as a panelist so he can ask those questions and have them addressed, if that's at all possible. So
Yeah, we
you
can
can-
certainly move Johan over. I saw the list. I don't know if we're gonna be able to get to all those today, because that was
yeah, he might have a priority as which ones he wants to ask, but if
I
it's
can-
possible to add him on, then I think that would give him an opportunity to share some of his comments. So if I go back to my first point, so what is the thinking once the plan is submitted in terms of an affordable housing oversight, if lack of a better term, commission to look at moving things forward?
So just to go through like next steps. So what we wanted to do today was give this group an opportunity to provide comment on the plan before we finalize the draft. Once that draft is out, it will be put out for public comment as well. And the next step is to set up a meeting, hoping to do a joint meeting between council and Planning and Zoning Commission to talk about this, to get, broader groups' feedback, with the ultimate goal, we would do an amendment to the Plan of Conservation and Development, referencing this plan as kind of like the toolkit guidance document related to affordable housing. So that's a good question on who would kind of hold our feet to the fire that we're actually acting on some of these things. So I think it would probably rest with both those bodies, but having a separate subcommittee that's kind of looking at this on, whatever time period they felt was appropriate, makes sense. We also, per the Affordable Housing Trust Ordinance, there's going to be a separate group that looks at potential applications for that. So that's potentially another avenue you could go where you could have that group kind of, maybe that requires modifying the ordinance, but you could have that group also kind of saying, hey, where is the city on these, these goals and recommendations?
Adam?
Thank you. Thank you, Ashley. I just wanted to, in a self-serving way, point out that if we're already over 10% affordable units in the city and the workforce, the 10% set aside that we're going to have going forward is only going to, it's not even going to maintain the status quo in and of itself. It's only going to sort of reduce the percentage of units in the city that are affordable, since we'll be producing through that initiative less of a percentage than we have now. I just want to say that I think that a lot of the focus to expand affordable housing and to maintain housing that's affordable to all is going to have to be through initiatives from agencies like my own and Michelle's and other entities that are building 100% affordable developments or close to 100% affordable developments. And I'm already encouraged. Steve's staff has already been working on some incentives that will assist us in being able to do just that. So I just think that if we dwell too much on the 10% number, that's sort of the minimum takeaway we can get from the affordable developments that are going up. I believe the numbers that's all you can do if you're using traditional sources of revenue. So if we want to expand the affordable housing, we want to diversify the housing we have now. It's going to have to be through entities like my own that use low-income housing tax credits and state bond funding and other state funding that is generally not accessible to private developers who are looking to build predominantly luxury apartment complexes. So I don't see that as a problem. I just don't see it as the solution. And we just need to keep our eye on agencies like my own that are, and like the Wall Street Place project that's going up now, that are seeking to build either exclusively or almost exclusively affordable housing.
Nicole?
Good afternoon. For those who do not know me, my name is Nicole Lears, and I am a common council member for District A. I really feel perplexed by the report that has been submitted. I think you did the job that we have contracted you to do, but I would have loved to see, even if there was something that was far-fetched, a few more recommendations of future Norwalk, what future Norwalk could possibly be. The affordable housing crisis, I call it a crisis. So my colleagues don't agree with me. I call it a crisis because I have people that I know, grew up with, that I live with, that are relatives of me, mine, that have been impacted by the lack of being able to stay in the city of their birth. And I understand your recommendations. I understand what was said about being conservative in those recommendations. I understand the whole 10%. To me, 10% is not enough. We're just doing the bare minimum. That's my personal opinion. With the cost of things going up, that 10%, what is that going to do? You're pouring water on a fire. I do not agree with the addition or adding on of any more luxury apartments. I think I would have loved to see some diversity or creativity in the recommendation of what could affordable housing look like outside of a renter. There are a lot of trends that are going on. I'm not saying that the city needs to jump on the trends. I do agree with someone who spoke earlier who said we need to have a private public partnership. I am a fan of Adam. I am a fan of others, but I think that partnership needs to go beyond Adam. I think we need to talk about ownership and what does affordable ownership look like. Now, I have to say it was a couple of weeks since I went through the document that was presented, and I might have missed it. It happens. But I would have liked something a little bit more tangible that as a legislator, I could have bite into and then try to figure out on the back end how to provide policies to support that. Public zoning is going to do what zoning is going to do. That is a separate entity. The common notion is that we cross responsibilities. We really don't. We hardly ever talk to each other because they do what they do and we do what we do. And as a member of the Common Council, my main responsibility is policy. I'm a policy maker. And it was hard for me, and it might have just been me, I don't know how the rest of my colleagues feel, to really get anything that I could sink my teeth into on the policy perspective of moving Norwalk. And I'm not saying 10 years, 20 years. I'm talking about Norwalk in 30, 40, and 50 years. Understanding that our constituents have said time and time again, they don't want apartments. I'm elected, so I have to hear that. Okay, you don't want apartment, but that doesn't mean that we cannot be creative in solving the problem of affordable housing. Is there any way that we can convert more of, and that was said earlier, the existing buildings? We just had a presentation by our Chamber of Commerce that says we have some industrial buildings that are empty. How are we looking at those industrial buildings? How we're looking at those empty buildings, those vacancies to address affordable housing? And so that's what was missing for me. And if it was an oversight on my end, I do apologize greatly. But that was something that I was really seeking. And I think that would be beneficial to the community at large to see that. So I don't know if that's possible to do an ad, if at all possible.
Yeah, I think we talked about reorganizing the table, and there were some elements within that table that did address some of your concerns. And I think bringing them forward more clearly as policy action items that the Common Council could undertake is something we can do. The community land trust item that we were speaking about earlier, that is an affordable home ownership opportunity. That doesn't have to be apartments, that could be smaller homes or townhomes in that type of situation. So that's certainly something we could take a look at, as well as some of the financing side of things and tax financing side of things. That is something that could potentially be within the Common Council's jurisdiction.
Nicole, in addition to that, though, from the zoning piece you talked about, we are separate entities. I totally get that. But the thing I would say is, like, the policy crosses over in a lot of ways. A lot of ways that we can move is going to be on zoning pieces. And we know how people have reacted when we tried to even do some modest upzoning. So anything y'all have from your constituents or understanding how to move that needle, I think will be helpful in saying, hearing, council folks saying, I'm okay with, upzoning some neighborhoods that are single family home to duplexes. And that's okay, because that can give ownership opportunity to more people. But until we get that too, I think we need that help with from the community outreach as well, part of it, if that makes sense.
I just want to be clear, and I know my colleague Johan has his hand raised. You're saying, Mr. Cantor, about outreach to the community and for the Common Council to help you with that link. Am I following what you're saying correctly?
I'm saying a lot of the policy here does, in fact, fall to the zoning side of it, but I don't think we need to look at it so black and white, into the sense of, because of you guys have such a close connection to the people, and obviously from zoning we're appointed, not elected. Like, some of these pieces are going to have impact to people in a way that we've tried to move the needle on to make things more affordable, and it was rejected by the community.
And I would push back to you, but I understand what you're saying, that we maybe interface with the community in a different way than maybe those appointed members of planning and zoning. But once you are appointed, you do have your due diligence that you should want to do. And
Sure.
maybe planning and zoning might want to think of and brainstorm ways to be more engaging in the community. I don't think me or any of my colleagues would ever have a problem referring or passing on or sharing any information we get, but now we're talking about a governmental thing. Even appointed positions, community members, constituents, people who just work here should feel empowered enough that they can come and communicate their concerns. And we would always help and assist however we can, but I would love planning and zoning outside of their normal monthly meetings to do some outreach. And maybe you have done, and maybe the brainstorming needs to be, how could that be more effective? But I think it would benefit people. First of all, people have to understand what planning and zoning is. They don't, but that's what government, because half of the people give us credit for stuff.
No, I think, Nicole, I'm saying something slightly different. I'm
Okay, then
slightly
what are you
asking
saying?
your views on what zoning policies would you be supportive of to change that would move the needle? And understanding.
That would be something that I have several colleagues on here. We would need to have a conversation and give you a concise list, so that would empower you to act on it. I know what my personal feelings are, but I think it would be beneficial if it came from the council to planning and zoning, so that you can then have some feet to work on it. But we can do that offline.
Totally.
Johan.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. So in reviewing this and reviewing especially the memo, financial feasibility portion of it, I do have to say, unfortunately for me, the conclusions in the development scenarios in the memo kind of appear to rely on claims that, to me, are not sufficiently justified or evidenced. So I provided an extensive list of questions, but for the time being, and so these questions are really just, they cover essentially every portion, almost every paragraph of the actual study. But so I'll just ask two questions. The first one is, so if none of the scenarios are actually feasible, and I know you guys use the leverage internal rate of return that is much lower than the weighted average of cost of capital, then does that mean that the assumptions have to be reevaluated or the models have to be looked at again? And then the second question is, if the internal rate of return thresholds typically required for developers to consider the feasibility of a project, then how much does the IRR actually have to be to warrant an investment? So those are the two questions I have for now. Then the rest I can just, I'll email them. Well, I email them to Steve and Steve can forward them to you. Thank you.
John or Gareth, you want
Right, so first question, I would say that, this is not a pro forma analysis for any particular development project. So with any project, there would be obviously variation in the assumptions to move forward. These are, assumptions that we used and were vetted with a combination of not-for-profit and private developers to arrive at this. Obviously, it's high-level pro forma. And again, it's not intended to reflect any individual project. It would benefit from, specifics as to all of the assumptions that were used here. Specific to the IRR, if Gareth is on, that's a question that I defer to him.
Yeah, so the IRR, just the return that the developer is going to get on the project, will have to be higher than the cost of the capital. So that's just what we used as the quote unquote hurdle rate. And that's just how much it costs the developer to get debt financing, and how much it costs the developer to get equity financing. And if they're below whatever that cost was, and for our assumptions, we spoke to a number of stakeholders and did some market research, and we landed on 7.6. So for our analysis, that IRR would have to reach 7.6 in order to be likely to be developed, to be incentivized. But like John pointed out, this is more of a like theoretical exercise. This is not meant to portray a specific building being built. So as a specific project would move through the development timeline, you would be able to assess that more accurately. This is more of just like a theoretical overview.
Okay, thanks, Lager. Just a quick follow-up. So, did you mention 2.7%? Is that what you mentioned?
7.6
Oh,
is
7.2, 7.6. Okay. So I noticed that it says here that there needs to be a 2.7% boost in RR. Now, do you know what sort of kind of realistic mechanisms or conditions have to be in place for that 2.7 to be achieved?
Yeah, I think that 2.7 was in reference to a specific scenario and comparing that scenario's IRR to the hurdle rate. But definitely a form of tax abatement would be able to provide a 2.7% boost. Also, as we had discussed earlier, if there's publicly owned land, that would decrease the cost of acquiring land for a development. That could potentially provide that 2.7% boost.
Perfect. All right. Thanks a lot. I'll follow up. I'll just give someone else a chance to ask some questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else who hasn't spoken that has questions? Because I always have more on my list.
I think you're up for round two.
Okay. A few things I saw in the report that I didn't see make it into the sort of matrix of action items that were either things that other towns had done, maybe that you guys maybe recommended, pre-approved detached ADU plans. And I was wondering if there's a reason why that wasn't included in the list. I think there might have been something about reducing ADUs from site plan to as of right, or just various things more specifically to increase the use of ADUs. There might have been something on the matrix about like make it easier to do ADUs, but I was looking more for those like very specific action items.
Yeah, I think that's something we can add to the matrix.
Okay. And then I was wondering, I know the GIS people or the people in government are they can do a lot of cool analyses. Like I know we had the map of all the ADUs when we were doing the zoning rewrite. I was wondering if there's any way that the city could identify parcels in town that have enough space in their driveway or have detached garages or in some way, shape, or form look feasible for ADUs and sort of notify those homeowners. Say, by the way, your property looks like it's big enough, or it looks like you have enough parking spaces, or did you know that you have whatever the ability to do this? I was wondering about some sort of advertisement there. I was wondering about looking at, you talked about reducing the extra parking space requirement. If we could do that in a targeted way, if it could be something like you can build an ADU without needing an extra parking space if you deed restrict it at 30 or 50% AMI, or if you deed restrict it to people coming off the CAN list for homelessness, recent homelessness. I was wondering about possible construction grants tied to deed restricting at those lower AMIs. I saw a recommendation for annual review of the workforce regs and sort of seeing, you said if the interest rates and the different things have changed such that it now would be feasible to go to 15% or to go from 80 to 60%. So does that mean that we're going to have AKRF do like this same report every year and tell us if the situation on the ground has changed? Or is it that AKRF is going to tell us, okay, to get to feasibility, let us know when interest rates are at this point, and then it might be feasible and we'll come back and do it. I'd like to have sort of like a clearer plan on that. There was mention of the Norwalk renovation program that the redevelopment agency, I think, has. And I was just curious is that an active program? How many homes have they helped renovate into, I forget what they were changing them from, but into single family to duplexes or something to something. It looked really cool, but I couldn't tell if it was something that was an active thing, how effective it had been. If it was effective, should we be looking at expanding it in some way? A little more detail on that. And then I'll stop there for now, but I do have more.
Okay. So for the matrix, yes, we can add that recommendation to regarding the pre-approved attached ADUs or plans, ADU plans to the matrix. GIS analysis. That, I mean, it's feasible. We would have to screen out things like where there's sewer access. If it's an area of the city that's on septic and well, you know, there's gonna be less space on those properties. So it's feasible. I'm not sure it's within our current scope to take that on.
Yeah, I
but
wasn't even saying for you guys to do it, but like, is that a silly idea? If it's not a silly idea, like, could there be some sort of marketing to homeowners to proactively let them know about the ability to convert a basement or a garage to an ADU, and what are the city requirements and how do you go about doing it? And it would be a fun thing for you to do. And if that could be targeted to the parcels that would best support it, like that's, you know, cool. Maybe that's not possible. I don't know. I was just
It's something
wondering.
it's something we could work into a recommended action item for sure.
That's what I meant.
Yeah. And how that plan ultimately gets focused, whether it's an online campaign, a digital campaign, or a mailing, and there's a wide variety of costs associated with that. So that's something we can add. The targeted way to reduce the parking requirement, that could be something worked into like a density bonus situation, or I don't know if you'd want that specifically for ADUs, or you were thinking that was for.
Well, that idea that I had was in relation to ADUs. I was just looking at, we have so few, and since we put out the regulation and then I think reformed it with this year, and just there was a section of the report about ways to expand that, but then I didn't necessarily see all of those things in the recommendation. And so trying to think creatively about, we need more affordable housing. We do. 85% makes sense, but we need it at 30, 50, 60%, right? And so how can we really push on that? But also with the housing density bonuses, like, you know, we have the density bonuses for East Norwalk, TOD, for a lot of environmental stuff. Could we say that our new density bonuses are all going to be about targeted affordability at these lower bands, where we're missing things, or the 2 bedrooms?
So just to go back to what Adam was saying, so for some of these more deeply affordable units, probably the most practical way to get them built is through 100% affordable buildings in a public-private partnership, because that's how you can get the financing for it, and through the grant programs. It's going to be harder to require those in a market rate building.
Okay.
And then if you remember those changes that we're doing with the current zoning reregs that are going to the public hearing next week, do focus on work directly with Adam and figuring out what can benefit them for density bonuses to starting that ball rolling. So Brian and Steve work directly with Adam to figure out, okay, what density do we need at what AMI to get for them to be able to start doing some different projects that have been sort of stalled, for lack of a better word. And so that, just remember, that's in, I think we're already taking on that, which is great, but I think more can always be done.
Thank you.
For the construction grants, I think we have a few recommendations in the plan right now that are tied to micro grants for either for existing buildings, for some of these more naturally affordable buildings that are older, that are in need of repair. If they went through this hypothetical micro grant program to improve, then those units could be deed restricted. And that could also be used for construction as well, like for new construction. Specific recommendations for revisiting the pro forma. We can add something in there. It doesn't have to be ACAREP. It could be whoever your consultant is at the time. And that would probably be something that would be controlled by the zoning commission in terms of when they want to revisit the law. It's something that they would be looking at. And the Norwalk redevelopment program, I think there was like a
Renovation program.
Oh, sorry, renovation program.
It was through the redevelopment agency or department. I wish I had the page number marked.
I know there was like a Main Street
Oh, here it
facade
is.
program that we heard about and thought that this was something that could be modeled after that existing.
It's page 419. The Norwalk Redevelopment Agency created the Norwalk Renovation Program to implement a pilot that purchased homes to rehab as 2 families. These homes were then sold as deed restricted, creating for ownership affordable housing, which sounds like it hits, you know, a lot of this group's buttons. So I was just wondering, this was a pilot program. Can we have more detail on when was that done? How many did they convert? Was it successful? Should we expand it?
We can take a look at that and see where that program is today.
And not to call out Mark Dillon, but he's from redevelopment. I'm not sure if that rings any bells for him or if he has any knowledge.
Good afternoon, everybody. Mark Dillon, Development Manager at the Redevelopment Agency. I don't have the data in front of me for that program, but it does ring a bell, and I'll be happy to, if you want to reach out, actually send me an email or I can get your contact and we can shoot some details over to you. I'll bring it back to the group.
Thanks.
Yeah, can I just jump in? Because the Redevelopment Agency and the Housing Authority did do a home ownership program together using Choice Neighborhoods Initiative funding from our redevelopment of Washington Village. And we can take another look at the data on that. But the thinking at the time was it was an incredible amount of money put into, just so one family could have a single family, not a single family, a two family unit. And it was sort of, there were a variety of pros and cons with that project, but it was determined it was just sort of a tremendous amount of resources and funding going into just one family. And that's why it wasn't replicated at the time, because the original plan had been to do more of it. So we've been playing with these things, and the Housing Authority believes the best way to do single family home, not single family home, but home ownership is through our Section 8 program, which we're going to be trying to put some more energy into and get more families involved with. We already have a bunch of families doing home ownership through the Section 8 program, but it can be a very expensive endeavor just to sort of serve one family.
Is the Section 8 program open right now for applications?
So we have about a little over 1,000 families in Section 8. About 650 or so have vouchers that can be used towards this program. Any one of them would qualify for this program. The wait list is currently closed for Section 8, so new families cannot get on. We probably won't open it for another 6 or 7 years, is my guess at this time. And just because we only have so many vouchers, there's close to 1,000 families on the list, and they will be coming off of the list and getting vouchers through attrition as time goes. But it's the families that currently have the regular housing choice vouchers that would qualify. Again, that program is instead of paying 30% of their income towards their rent and utilities, they'd be paying 30% of their income towards their mortgage and utilities. There are challenges with that HUD program in that unless you're disabled, it's only for 15 years. So you need to sort of, within 15 years, become able to take on your mortgage yourself. and then you lose your voucher after those 15 years as opposed to having it for life. But it is a program that we have successfully helped a lot of families. I think 15 are in the program now with home ownership. And that's sort of our preferred way of working with it for now.
Nicole.
Yeah, thank you. I have a few things. I hope I don't forget them. I thought I saw somewhere in here where they did say there were some affordable programs to help you purchase a home. Can we get a list of those programs that Norwalk has? Because people do ask about those programs, and I remember going through one a long time ago, but I don't know what's active and what's not. Can we get a list of that? Also, Stanford has they have the Housing Development Fund, and they have figured out how to rehabilitate homes, and you can purchase them, at affordable rates. I don't know if we should take a look at their model, because I think it's a good model. Also, when we say deeply affordable, we're talking, with Adam's program and with Michelle's, those are deeply affordable. I don't fall in that category. So, right, I fall in the middle. And so that's what's missing. That's what we're talking about here. And it's not necessarily, as Nicole said, I'm not looking for more apartments. I don't necessarily want to stay in an apartment, right? I would like to have a townhome or something. I think we can start to build and be more creative with things, building things, maybe a little bit on a smaller scale, but that's the type of stuff I'm talking about. I'm not really talking about more apartment buildings. And the last thing is on the action page, on the fourth action down, it's 1, 2, 3, 4 on page 5-1. And this is talking about permitting the state statute to consider amending section 612 to allow for existing tenants to increase their annual income. That I would like to see as number 1 on the list, because that looks like it doesn't have a huge challenge, only a language challenge. So if we can put that first on the list, that would be great. Full disclosure, that would affect me. So anyway, I think that's it. If I can remember anything else, I'll bring it up, but that's important. That would be a help. That would be a big help for people. So, because again, I will state, people are turning down promotions and negotiating salary prices because they don't want to get kicked off the affordable program. And that's just insane to me.
We heard that in the process, and that's so we had to word that carefully so we didn't run afoul of 830G. But yes, agreed.
Okay.
That's at the state level, right, Ashley?
That's at the state level.
The state sets that limit, so that'd be working with our state reps to have them work that through. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Okay.
In regards to your other questions, we can take a look at Stanford's program, see if it's something that could be replicated. And then in regards to the home ownership opportunities, and the first time home buyer credits and programs, we do have a number of those sprinkled throughout the matrix. We are also preparing a guidebook, and that guidebook has all those programs listed. So that's something that would be available when the plan's finalized. And then in regards to more options for constructing those types of units, we did flag through the land use and zoning analysis a number of areas within the city that weren't included in some of the opportunities for maybe more townhomes, or we tried to identify some areas on the fringes where the next time that the city takes a look at expanding the zoning, increasing the opportunities for triplex units, quads. There are a lot of those housing types that we call gentle density or missing middle housing, and it doesn't change the character of the single family neighborhood. There are housing styles and types that fit within those single family neighborhoods and provide a lot of opportunity for new homeowners. especially if it's a situation like a duplex where one person owns the entire unit, they can rent out the other half. And that enables them to pay their mortgage and provides another unit of housing for someone else.
Okay, thank you.
Nicole?
I'm the other Nicole, yes. I have a question, and Ashley, you were saying something and it sparked something in me. In the beginning or early part of this conversation, we spent a lot of time talking about developers and development. Just for a point of clarification before I ask my secondary question, when we're saying developers and development, are we talking about like big developers and big developments? How are we defining that?
So we're talking about the full range. So when we were talking about some of the larger buildings and that 10% set aside, that's generally talking about a larger scale development, a multifamily building. But there's a lot of smaller developers who are doing single family homes or duplexes, or maybe they own an existing apartment building, or a group of duplexes. There also are opportunities for those smaller scale developers as well.
And the reason, thank you for that. And the reason why I'm asking, just recently the city lost, I say a young man, but he was 90, I think he was 93 years old. And he was a landlord of at least 12 different units that I could think off the top of my head. Technically, he was a developer because he got the properties, he refurbished the properties, he did all that, but he never was identified or put into that development column. Okay, this was an African-American man. Him and his brothers got together and they bought a lot of property. In the last 3 years, I had several conversations with him, feeling kind of stuck. He kind of felt the bigger developments, the people who made the apartment buildings, the waypoints and all of those, there were a lot of tax breaks and a lot of things for those bigger, more traditional developments compared to someone who may just be an owner of multiple homes, but is providing affordable housing. Is there any, and I don't know, I'm thinking, I'm dreaming, I'm reaching into the stars. Is there any language, have we thought about anything of training people, teaching people how to be developers, but on a more micro level that will still address affordable housing? It'll address quite a few things. It'll address affordable housing. It'll address them becoming economically, I don't know, benefiting them economically, but they're not the big developers. I feel like we're getting lost a little bit.
So I would say we have a couple things for that. So the micro grant programs that I was speaking of as being an option, those are programs that would be targeted for that type of smaller scale developer or landlord, where they could get capital financing or capital dollars to improve their existing building, or maybe build a new small building, and as long as it's providing deed restricted. So that's affordable housing. So that's one option. We're also, as part of this guidebook, identifying some of the existing programs that are already on the books. And this guidebook would be a handout for, it could be up on the city's website, would be available for these types of developers and as well as homeowners, could be something that you could pass out to your constituents who are looking for this information.
Would it be, just from your perspective, not to cut you off, I'm sorry, would it be beneficial for the city to do some training of these group of people? I'm sure he wasn't the only person. He's the only person I may know. But
so we did flag that as an option as well, with some training opportunities and cross information. So yes, I think that would be beneficial. I do agree.
Can I just comment on that as well? Because I think one of the challenges, it's like beyond training, right? I mean, if you want to take advantage of some of like state, and I'm talking outside of Norwalk, right? So if we're trying to encourage people who have maybe done this like more on their own, but want to get into more of a pipeline, like we have to hire a consultant to help us through that process. Like Adam has specific staff, right? That this is what they do, or even consultants. I'm not sure if their roles exactly. So I think in some ways, even exploring like someone who works in the city who helps people go through these processes could be beneficial as well, because it is as somebody who's like currently going through this process, it's very long, very labor intensive, very detailed. And if you don't, you'll never get through it unless you understand how the process works and or have someone, right, who can help you. And so it really does box out a lot of people. And so I think, you know, that sort of pre-development work, support in that area beyond training, would really be required to grow other developers locally.
Can I, just last one? I'll do these rapid fire. There's a section about increasing efficiency of helping the people who are looking for affordable housing. And I've been looking for workforce housing for the last couple weeks, months, and have feedback of that. If we could have one standard application for workforce housing for any workforce housing in Norwalk, if we could have some landlords have a separate application to just get on the wait list that's shorter, and then a longer application when you get called off the wait list. If everybody could be required to do that, and again, have a standard apply for the wait list and a standard full application for workforce units, to require all workforce housing buildings that have a website, because I know some of them just have a few units and they don't have a website, but if they have a website, that it has to clearly have a link for how, you know, that they have workforce units, how to apply for them, or how to get on the wait list, to either require that wait lists stay open or require that when they are closed, there's a way for people to register to be notified when the wait list opens up. And then to require all the workforce buildings to provide updated contact information on the Norwalk Affordable Housing website. And that's all.
Thank you. I'm still resting down.
So we allotted an hour and a half and we're at 4:33. I think this was a lot of good conversation tonight. And I want to thank everybody for participating in this process. I think we have some good comments to incorporate, but a good product as well. If the committee's okay with it, we do have one person on from the public that if we could hang on a couple more minutes and see if they would like to speak. You just have to raise your hand and we'll bring you over. You have Diane Cece.
Oh, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. I guess I'm the one person. Nice to see everyone. I'll be brief. I probably would have had a ton of questions. I actually had to hop on and off during your presentation due to work. But I know that I would have a lot of questions had I had a copy of that draft report as well. So I couldn't find where that was posted on the city website, and I hope it gets posted right away so the public can take a look at that. But then I was glued to the screen listening to all of you folks with the good questions and suggestions that you came up with. And so I think it was a really good discussion, and I definitely will have some questions and comments, but I would be eager to actually see the report. I'm often more of a process person than I am a particular topic, but in this case, I'm very interested in both. And I would just always encourage city staff to, when documents are made available to a committee or a commission, please make them available to the public at the same time. And because FOI allows you to do that, and that's what we rely on as well. Thank you all very much.
Thanks, Diane. So that kind of leads into next steps. So like Steve mentioned earlier on, we'll allow some more comments to come through via email if anything comes up, or if there's something that you said tonight you want to put in email, you could do that way. We'll probably keep it open another 2 weeks if that makes sense, Ashley. Tie up any loose ends, and then we will have a joint meeting with planning and zoning and the council. And then we did want to give the committee an opportunity to see the draft. Once we incorporate all the edits, we'll make that draft public for Ms. Cece and the public to take a look at. Otherwise, if anybody else has any last words, I see Johan.
Thanks, Michelle. A quick question. Should I still submit the remainder of the questions that I had on the feasibility study that's located in the memo? I mean, will it be refined? Can it be refined, or is that like a separate undertaking or negotiation?
Yeah, you could put your thoughts in an email. I mean, like we said, in the future we're going to be taking a look at all that stuff more. So, I mean, yeah, if you want, I would encourage you to put all your comments in an email, and we can always just take a look.
Okay, that's fine. I'll do that. All right, thank you.
All right. So that should be it. Thank you everyone for joining tonight.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.